Hi, I'm Pete McConville and welcome back to my channel, Not So Obvious Watches. You asked me a bunch of questions last week. I'm going to try and answer them all now. This is going to be a really long video, so I'm going to cut straight to the intro and see you on the other side. Okay, so there's a lot of questions here. A lot of them are quite long. I'm just going to stick the whole question up. I'm not going to read it, but I'll do my best to answer all of it. But I will be moving pretty quickly. First off, Martin Smith has asked me if I thought the Timepiece Gentleman debacle was entirely self-inflicted, just to punch up their YouTube numbers, or was there something bigger going on, some kind of conspiracy? I am 100% convinced this was completely them screwing themselves. I've done a whole video on this. I'll try and put a link in about now. In that video, I looked at what was going on with their channel numbers. You could see that they had completely kind of flatlined sometime around April, May. I'm certain that they conceived this whole go dark thing as a way of generating some buzz and trying to punch through a plateau they'd kind of found themselves on. I think that there is zero likelihood that there was anything more than that happening. That is not to excuse them. I think they are complete idiots and that this has failed, but I don't think there's some enormous industry or criminal conspiracy here. I think that's a lot of people just looking for some drama to get excited over. Anthony Rinaldi asks, what do I think of the Omega Racing Speedy 44? I absolutely love that watch. I'm quite a Speedy fan. I think it's a really iconic, important, good-looking, attractive, interesting watch. I don't own one, but that doesn't mean I don't like the watch. I understand that the Moonwatch is kind of the one everyone thinks about, but I think like you, Anthony, I reckon the Racing is the best looking version. I personally I think it's black on black with orange accents. That's my personal fave. But yeah, across the board, I think the Speedy's a great watch, and I think that the Racing is kind of the hidden gem that I'd be going after if I was going to buy a Speedy. New Zealander, I think I'd say that, says that he'd love to experience a brand like Certina, which he can't get hold of in New Zealand, and was wondering what's the safest way of dealing with something like that. I can't really help you. I've experienced similar things with trying to get some time up with Hamiltons and Certinas. And now one of my favorite brands, Alpina, doesn't seem to have a local distributor. And that's a pain. And I can't give you a safe way of dealing with that. I try Chrono 24 and eBay with care, just like everyone else. So I'm sorry, I can't really help you there. You do ask about Sinn, and I can help you there. I can personally recommend Fabio going from Time Only. Time Only is an authorized distributor or authorized dealer for Sinn and a bunch of other similar brands like Mueller Glasuta. I have purchased 2 watches off Fabio. I've ordered a third. I have met him several times, get on like a house on fire. He's a great guy. I have complete faith in him, and I have no hesitation in recommending him as an AD. So being in New Zealand, I'm not sure how much he can help you get hands-on, but I know he's an AD for Australia and New Zealand, and I would strongly recommend you reach out to Fabio and have a chat about what you can do for some of those other watches. Okay, first off, I won't read all of Stavros's comment. The first thing is, Stavros, I apologize. I started doing the sort of scrolling using my graphics tablet as a shortcut when I was actually taking notes. And then I lazily started using it in the videos. And I have known that I should stop doing this and be more careful, but it's too easy. You know what? Thank you. You will be the impetus for me to stop doing that. The second thing is, you ask about why solar movements don't seem to have taken off and taken over. And I don't know. I'd never really thought about it till you asked the question. I think you can look at solar movements sort of east versus west because they've got quite different footprints. In the east, so Seiko and Citizen and Casio are all over it. They've clearly got the technology. They clearly roll it out. But why don't they use it in their higher end core swatches, only their cheap stuff? Is it a technology thing? Is it a marketing thing? I don't know. As far as the Europeans, I've got a bit better theory. My theory is that for the Europeans that do quartz, they'd already decided that quartz was going to be cheap and cheerful watches that they weren't going to overly invest in. And as a result, sort of the solar technology came after they'd made that decision. And so they just didn't bother. They just couldn't be asked upgrading their quartz technology to take advantage of this. I think what has changed is recently brands like Cartier have realized actually quartz doesn't have to be cheap. You can put it into more expensive watches. That has justified more investment. And here we are with a solar powered Cartier. Will this mean other brands follow that path? I don't know, but that's about the best I can think of right now. Okay, so Kabir Bogra, I hope I didn't murder that name, has asked a series of questions really around my thoughts on the high-end jewelry guys and girls getting involved in watches. So I'll try and address each of these questions up front. The first is, what do I think of it? I think it is great. I think it is, if you look at some of the most interesting, exciting watches that are like moving the needle on watch design at the moment, they're coming from places like Hermes and Bulgari. So the idea that these people who are aesthetically attuned, who have got that kind of visual sensibility, who aren't afraid to try and acknowledge the fact that these are things that are supposed to look good, I think is brilliant and could be one of the things that sort of moves us out of this kind of moribund state we're at the moment with so many watch companies just looking backwards. So I totally welcome these new design-driven, aesthetically sensitive organizations being involved. You asked the question if I think they're trying to move exclusively into the high end and sort of give up on that mid-tier luxury. I do not believe that is so. It is absolutely the case that they want to move in higher. You're quite right. You know, Chanel getting on board with FP Journe, Hermes getting into bed with Parmigiani. They clearly do want to sell at the high end. But looking at Hermes, for example, who recently had one of the stars of the show with their new kind of modern take on a field watch. Hermes, Bulgari, Louis Vuitton, Chanel all have really strong entries in that kind of Rolex level, Omega Breitling space. And I think they're definitely going to stay there. They'll certainly push up as well. I think that Rolex, Breitling, Omega end is probably the lowest they'll go, but they're not going to leave it. I think that is definitely going to be their starter place. The last question you ask is, how do I see Richemont playing out in here, being that they are a combined jewelry and general luxury brand? First off, and you're asking, could they go past Rolex and Swatch? The first thing I'd say is I think Richemont as a group has. If they're not bigger than Rolex and Swatch already, I'd be surprised. It would certainly be a close run thing, I think. But interestingly, you've left off the two big ones. LVMH and Kering Group. Kering, who most people forget, but Kering own Ulysse Nardin and Girard-Perregaux. They dwarf Richemont and they totally swamp Swatch and Rolex. They're going gangbusters. And the luxury side, the general luxury side, the fragrance, fashion, jewelry side, is really their powerhouse. That's where they drive. I think that is, you asked the question, do I think they're going to lose ground or gain it? I think it is going to be nothing but wins for those brands. I think they are going to drive forward. And in a bizarre way, it could be the growth of those brands which actually ends up costing Rolex its place on the hill. Not because they're going to suddenly start taking, not because any one of those brands, like Bulgari's not going to start selling more watches than Rolex or anything. That's not what I mean. But what I mean is, as you've said yourselves, these are brands that specialize in selling luxury. These are brands that specialize in selling status and etc. And they're good at it. You know, the guy that runs LVMH is the richest man in the world because he knows how to do this stuff. If each one of those takes 5 to 10% of the current Rolex buyers, then suddenly the brands that are behind Rolex start to look a whole lot better. I think LVMH, Kering Group, Richemont, etc., and their brands are probably one of the most exciting things to be happening in the watch community at the moment. And I think maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next year, but over the next 5 or 10 years, what those luxury brands do, those jewelry brands do to watches will be transformative and will totally change the way the industry works. Okay, so Henry asks a nice simple question. How accurate do I think the estimated worth system is on Chrono 24? I certainly wouldn't bank on it. Maybe it's good for coming up with an insurance estimate or something, but like I said, it's not part of my investment plans. It's fun. It's probably more accurate than your star sign bit of a newspaper, but apart from that, I can't really say too much. Okay, so Michael Riera says that once upon a time, Breitling was right up there with Rolex and Omega and cross-shopped with those guys. You'll hear I actually tend to group those three brands together now as kind of in that mid-range, mid-luxury kind of triumvirate. But it is true that makes me unusual. Most people don't. I take Michael's point that Breitling has kind of dropped off the enthusiast's radar. He asks the question, can they get back there? Absolutely. So the first thing is, can they? Yes. Are they on the right track to do so right now? Yes. Do they need to keep doing or change something? Absolutely. I think that this is not, again, a little bit like my last comment. I don't know what you'd call it, the recoronation, the return to the throne of Breitling is not going to happen next year or the next 2 years. This means what we're talking about here is another 4, 5, 10 years of consistent investment and ownership and stewardship from the existing management, and most importantly from CVC, the equity company that owns them. So they can do it. Will they do it? I don't know. It really does depend on what the owners of the company want. One thing I would say, though, is I don't think Breitling is ever going to be cross-shopped with Rolex ever again. Not because they won't have watches of enough quality, not because they won't be good enough, but rather the way Breitling is positioning itself is kind of the anti-Rolex. Breitling's core messages at the moment of inclusivity, sustainability, accessibility, casual, fun is almost like anti-Rolex. Those things are antithetical to the whole point of Rolex being Rolex. I think what Breitling's aiming for are not the people who were thinking of buying a Rolex, but rather the people who would never want to buy a Rolex. That's the person Breitling wants to sell to. So as I said, I think Breitling could get to the point where, pound for pound, they go toe to toe with Rolex and Omega, obviously. But do they want to shop for the same customer? I don't think they do. Ilfonso, as always, has asked a really interesting couple of questions. First is, from a philosophical point of view, what do I think of time? And secondly, do I think being in this hobby and being into watches makes us more conscious of it, more aware of how to deal with? The first answer is, okay, so for me, time is the passage of events. The what will be becoming the what is, becoming the what was. It's marked by change and difference. So that is time for me. don't have change, don't have events passing, don't have what will be becoming what is, and you don't really have time. We don't experience it. The next question that you ask is, does being into watches help us, give us a better understanding of that? Absolutely not. In fact, one of the great ironies of this hobby is that so many people who are invested in understanding and owning and collecting the instruments that mark the passing of time spend so much energy avoiding the passing of time and focus on things which are timeless and unchanging. I think that's a really interesting little quirk of our hobby. And I think there's a lot of people in our hobby who are utterly unaware of the idea of time, and don't want to be aware of it. And that's kind of curious, given what we're talking about. Well, you know what? As always, you guys gave me way too many questions, which I really enjoyed answering. This video went on way too long, and so I'm going to arbitrarily chop it here at 15 minutes and pick up the rest of these answers in another video, probably tomorrow, maybe the day after. I've been Pete McConville. This has been Not So Obvious Watches. Thank you so much for your questions. I hope you enjoyed my answers, and I'll see you later. Bye.